don't watch television. I use YouTube in order to find interviews and pieces of content that are interesting to me, that are relevant to my own interests. And so back in 2022, 2023, Andrew Tate kept coming up on my YouTube feed. I didn't know who he was. I just kept seeing his face come up over and over again on my YouTube feed. And initially I just ignored any of this content because I was thinking, who the fuck is this guy? Who is Andrew Tate? And then I clicked into a YouTube short and he was kind of off on one of his rants. It was like 20 or 30 seconds. And I sort of listened to it and went, I don't know who this person is. I'm just not interested. And so he kept coming up. And then I started to see in the mainstream media, the mainstream media started to heavily criticize Andrew Tate. Heavily criticize him. Then he got banned from the social media platforms. And so that caught my attention. Because remember, we were coming out of COVID. And so I started to see him getting banned on social media. And he started to get slandered in the press. And so I thought, hold on, Andrew Tate, that name sounds familiar. And then I went, oh, that's the guy that keeps coming up on my YouTube feed. And so I saw all of this slandering in the mainstream media. I had seen that he was banned from YouTube, banned from all social media, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. And so I thought, well, this is interesting. What is this dude's deal? What's he up to? So then I started to watch some of his content to see, well, okay, well, what's the big deal? So I got the mainstream media's side of the story. I could see that they thought he was really dangerous. He had this misogynistic rhetoric. He was very violent. He was encouraging violence among his supporters, encouraging his supporters to be misogynistic, to hate on women. This is all the stuff I was hearing. I was hearing that he was homophobic. All this sort of stuff. He didn't believe in depression. Oh, Lord God, he didn't believe in depression. They really didn't like that one. So I start to hear all of these things. And so I say, okay, my interest has been piqued. I'm going to go and listen to Andrew Tate in his own words, because I'm hearing a lot of people talk about him and try to relay his message to me. How about I just go straight to the source and I hear his own message from him, from his own mouth? And so that's what I started to do. I thought I'll run the experiment fairly. He's coming up a lot in common media. He's coming up on my YouTube feed. So let's listen to the man in his own words. So what did I do? I started to listen to Andrew Tate in a long form context, 2-hour podcast episodes. And so I listened to a few of these. And after basically the second podcast, I was able to come to the conclusion, okay, this is very clear. So literally 2 podcasts. I listened to the first podcast and went, pretty interesting character. You know, that was a good podcast, but let's do another one just to make sure that, you know, we want to have a large enough sample size of podcasts. So I listened to a second podcast with Andrew Tate. And after the second podcast, I had heard enough. I could clearly see that all of these clips of Andrew Tate, these 20-second, 30-second clips, they were clipped out of context. What he was saying was just a joke. It was for comedic effect. It was clipped out of context and it was plastered over social media. And of course, the mainstream media leapt on top of these and tried to paint Andrew Tate in a certain light. Just like the BBC tried to paint Donald Trump and his speech in a certain light. And so whenever I actually went to the source, in other words, I actually went to Andrew Tate's content, I realized very quickly, Lord God Almighty, okay, we've got this guy, he's a kickboxing world champion. He's very successful in life. He's lived a very interesting life, a very unique existence. He's traveled a lot. He has a lot of experience. He's made a lot of money. He's an interesting guy. He has interesting insights about how the world works. And so I started to listen and I started to get his side of the story. And so then what happened? I was now in a better position to make a judgment on Andrew Tate. And Tristan Tate too, having listened to some of the interviews with Tristan. Tristan doesn't do as many interviews, but I did go and try to find some of his interviews as well, because he always gets thrown into the same discussion with Andrew. So I watched both of them in a long form context. And so, having got the BBC and mainstream media's verdict of them, I then get their side of the story, and now I'm in a position to make an informed conclusion. And so that's the position we want to get ourselves in, folks. When people are clipped out of context, when people are being portrayed as a certain way through media, the best thing to do, folks, the best thing to do is to get both sides. You can listen to the mainstream media if you want to, but please bear in mind that let's just say on numerous occasions, the mainstream media, the BBC, the Guardian, the Sunday World, whatever the fuck you want to talk about in terms of mainstream media, whoever you want to refer to, they have all been caught at various times being deceptive in their reporting. And so that's fine. We need to bear that in mind. We've talked about this before on the show. We need to run background checks on our sources of information. We need to see what their track record is like when it comes to presenting the facts of reality honestly. And so if a media outlet has a poor track record, in other words, if a media outlet has been caught multiple times being deceptive or portraying people in a certain light that isn't representative of who it is that they are, then we need to factor that into our analysis when we are considering what it is that that particular media outlet is actually saying. And so that's fine. We always run a background check on our sources of information. So we take the information. That's okay. That's one side of the story. The logical thing to do, folks, is to go and get, in this case, Andrew and Tristan Tate in their own words. Go watch them in a long-form context. And now you're in a position to cast judgment over who is being most accurate. Is it the BBC in this case, and Netflix with their adolescence documentary? Or is it Andrew and Tristan Tate in their own words? So, that would be the lesson from tonight's story on Andrew and Tristan Tate. They've had their assets and money seized, and apparently a portion of that money, £1 million, is going to be reinvested into fighting violence against women and girls in the UK. I've tried to lay it out as best as I can for you. The Bandido has done his homework. I have listened to the mainstream media and its coverage of Andrew and Tristan Tate. I have also went and listened to Andrew and Tristan Tate in their own words. So I now am in a position to come to a conclusion about who is actually representing the facts of reality most accurately. The question is, are you in that same position? Because if you are one of these people who are criticizing Andrew and Tristan Tate for being misogynistic pigs and the devil's worshippers reincarnated, and you have not actually spent the time to consume some of their content in a long-form context, then you are a dipshit, and you deserve to be deceived. You deserve to be exploited by media outlets and other people. Because if you are going to go through this life taking only one side of the story and deliberately ignoring the other side of the story, you deserve to be exploited. You deserve to make mistakes. You deserve to make errors. And so that's what we want to do. We always want to get both sides of the story. I've done it. Have you? And because I've done it, I can put this media article into context because I now know what it's referring to. I understand the link that it's trying to draw. But whenever I actually go to the source, Andrew and Tristan Tate, there's a direct contradiction between Andrew and Tristan Tate's side of the story and how they are being portrayed by the BBC and other media outlets. And again, what else factors into my analysis? Well, what is the credibility of the mainstream media source that I am consuming? And I am also aware that mainstream media sources have a tendency to tell porky pies and not portray people in the actual accurate light that they should be portrayed in. Cue Donald Trump's speech. And the reason why I keep mentioning Donald Trump's speech, the deceptive edit, is because it literally happened so recently. I'm trying to not allow you to forget this because it's very important. We talk about this all the time. And I'm repeating myself. Running a background check on your sources of information. I don't want you to forget that. You have to assess the credibility of your source of information, its reputation for telling the truth. And when it does get something wrong, when one of your sources of information does get the facts of reality wrong, are they humble? Do they have humility to hold their hands up and say, oh, my apologies, I inaccurately reported. And I'm now going to take measures to ensure that this doesn't happen again. And then you watch and see, is the media outlet going to stay to its word? And this is the thing. I can see the contradiction. There's a contradiction between how the mainstream media articles, like the BBC, are portraying Andrew and Tristan Tate. Because when I listen to them in their own words, I can very easily hear and see that the very clips that the BBC and these other media articles are using to support their claim that Andrew and Tristan Tate are misogynistic pigs and they are influencing the young generation of British males and British people around the world and young people around the world to engage in violence against women and girls and to hate women. I can now see that portrayal of Andrew and Tristan Tate is at odds with what I'm seeing and hearing. Because when I listen to their message, I can see when comments are being made that have comedic undertones, or they're just outright jokes, and they're being clipped out of context. And these clips are then being used as evidence to convince you that they are misogynistic pigs and dangerous to the young men and the young people here in the UK and elsewhere in the world. But because I've got both sides of the story, I can now come to a well-informed conclusion. And what's my conclusion? Well, that's the thing. I can see the humour and the comedic effect in a lot of the things that Andrew and Tristan Tate say. They also have a general message of positivity when you actually listen to them. As a young man, become competent, become physically strong, physically capable, be healthy. Get your financial situation in order. You need to make sure that you are capable financially so that you can move or you can adjust or you can be adaptable. What's wrong with that? At its core, what is wrong with that? But of course, if you never get the other side of the story, you won't realize that there's actually a message that's being relayed, a message of get physically strong, get healthy, get competent, get financially secure. Grow your network. Collaborate with people who have your best interests at heart. Make sure that the people that you have around you are trustworthy. Don't have liabilities around you. Form a brotherhood. Get your brothers together. Get your little gang together. Your group of mates. Try to strive for excellence. Individual excellence. Be as competent as you can. Because the more competent you are, the more useful you can be to other people. These are some of the messages that come out of Andrew and Tristan Tate's content. But of course, if you're just going by one side of the story, you won't even realize that this is lying here on the other side. And so as a result, you aren't fully informed. And when you are not fully informed, you are liable to be exploited by other individuals or institutions. And you don't want to be in a position where you can be exploited. So that's the lesson from this story. Remember, folks, just like if you're a parent and your two kids have been in a brawl, you always get both sides of the story.